Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Karen Newell, and she has the Sacred Acoustics along with Eben Alexander. Is that correct?
He's a part of it. He's not a co-owner, though. I have a different business partner named Kevin Cossey, who is the primary audio engineer.
Okay. I guess we think of your names together. So
yes, but well, that's because we teach the technology along with other things together. We're more the public face of it. And Eben uses it all the time. So he talks about it very authentically as a practice that he partakes in.
Now, you had this already before you met him, I assume?
Well, here's the thing. About a year before we met Eben, Kevin Cossey and I had met, and we were both using sound to explore expanded states of consciousness. And he told me that he wanted to make his own binaural beats. That's the kind of technology that's embedded in these recordings. And I thought, well, you're not an audio engineer. How could you do that? And he said, well, I'm a mechanical and electrical engineer. So we know how to take apart things and put them back together. That's what we do. And so I had amassed a rather vast library of binaural beats, other type of audio recordings used for this purpose. And so we started a collaboration, Kevin and I. And, what we did was we would share a Skype screen. We didn't live in the same town. He was in New York. I was in Baltimore at the time. And we would share a Skype screen and start analyzing what was in these recordings. And then he would start rebuilding them in ways just to fit our personal preferences. And so we had spent about a year getting pretty far along with our own audio technology for doing this sort of thing. And that's when we met Eben. And fortunately, Eben was curious about our audio recordings when I told him. And it was actually before he had engaged with a publisher about his book, Proof of Heaven. He was up in New York, actually having meetings with publishers and an agent that he had just retained. And that's when Kevin went over to his hotel room and let him listen to our audio recordings, hooked up his brain to our EEG device, and Eben was blown away. He loved the effects that it had. And that's when he highly encouraged us to make these recordings available to others. And so Eben was really the catalyst for us to create a company and a commerce center online where people could come and purchase and find out for themselves what effects they might have. So that's how it all came together. And Eben is really our biggest fan. He's also our alpha tester. So he tests things first before anyone else because he's such a regular listener, and he's a great partner to have.
Now, am I wrong in assuming that you two fell in love during this?
We did. We did during this. Yes. When we first met, Kevin and I were at this retreat, and Eben was there as well. And Eben and I, we had a pretty instant kind of connection. And that's what kind of got us interested in having him try out this audio technology. And here we are today.
It's amazing. It's a very amazing story. I'd like to see a movie just on the two of you's love story. I mean, I would watch that.
All right. Well, since you're curious, I'll tell you a little bit more about our meeting. Okay. And when we first met, I knew he was a neurosurgeon. I think I knew he had a near-death experience for sure, but his story wasn't out in the general public. And so I didn't really know any details. So when we met, we were just meeting as fellow participants in a workshop. And on the first day of this workshop, we were all, it was actually a workshop to teach others how to use this kind of technology. And what we were doing was we were doing a mock course. And so the instructor had us all stand in a circle together, and Eben was standing next to me, and we all held hands, and we were directed to imagine that we could feel energy moving from our left to our right hands in this circle. And then we were asked to imagine that it switched directions, and then it was moving from the right to the left, left to the right. And so we did this for a little while, and then we were asked to split into partners. and do another exercise. And that's when Eben very enthusiastically asked me to be his partner. And so
Enthusiastically?
enthusiastically, yes.
Enthusiastic. Okay.
He's a very enthusiastic person in general. But when we split into pairs, and then the guidance was to one person would stand still and the other person would walk towards the one standing still and sort of feel when we noticed, if we noticed anything shift in the air, so something a little heavier, a little vibration, something like that, any difference as we walk towards the person. And so we were doing this with each other, and I was walking towards him at this point. And I could feel, like usually you can sort of feel a little barrier. It feels different, but a little subtle, little shift in energy. And so I was walking in and out of his energy field, and I was feeling something rather interesting, but I didn't want to speak of it. But Eben did. And he said, well, what I'm feeling now is the yin and the yang of our hearts joining as one. And I was like, oh my gosh, you said that out loud. I said, that's what I'm feeling. Although I wouldn't have picked those words, I felt this very warm connection. Now, up until this point, before I had met Eben, I had spent a considerable amount of time really working on feeling and knowing the sense of my heart. And so it wasn't a new feeling to me, but it was a new feeling that someone else would trigger that sort of warm, glowing kind of energy. And that's where it all began. And another interesting story is that we felt this connection, and yet it was a very more spiritual connection than any kind of physical drive. And that's what was so fascinating, is that we had felt like we'd known each other forever, just like we were just re-meeting. That's what it felt like. And I remember asking him, well, tell me about your near-death experience, but don't tell me what happened. Tell me, what's the biggest lesson you learned? Because I'd met other people who'd had near-death experiences, and they have all learned some kind of lesson. They've been through some kind of transformation. And usually it's some kind of personal thing. And I was curious, and I asked him, and he says to me, the brain doesn't create consciousness. And I was kind of confused by that. And I said, first of all, because it wasn't a personal kind of experience I was used to, but when he says the brain doesn't create consciousness as his most important lesson, I said, well, why would anyone think that it does? Because I didn't know. I didn't know that the materialist model had at its core this concept that consciousness arises from the physical brain. This is not a belief I had ever had. And so that's what kind of made our connection kind of interesting, because I seem to already know the lessons that the big important lesson to him, which shifted his materialist worldview. I already seemed to know that. So that intrigued him. And I said, well, you talk about this love that you connected with, this is after he told me more about that. And I said, you talk about this amazing love that you connected with. Why isn't that part of what you talk about with consciousness? And he's like, well, that kind of love, this was early on. This was about 3 years after his awakening from coma. And of course, now it's been 13 years. So that was about 10 years ago. And he says, well, you can't bring that love back here. It's too powerful. It's too much. And I said, I don't know about that, because I don't know if it's the same love that you've touched as a near-death experiencer, but I've touched that love and I have felt it right here, right now. And you can cultivate it. I said, I don't know if it's as powerful. I can't know. But what I have touched is amazingly powerful, amazingly healing, and we can all touch that love. And this is where he became fascinated with, oh my gosh, you can. And maybe this is more than just about science, but more about, the loving connections we all share. And of course, over time, Eben has come full circle with all of that, just through his own kind of meditations and explorations, but also the collaborations that we have when we discuss all of this from our differing points of view.
I can only imagine the conversations you guys have had.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Sometimes This was very funny. We were in Costa Rica once, and a big fan of his, a huge fan of his, who just loved his books and was moved by his story. She came and had lunch with us. We were seated together, and she came and ate with us. And I can't remember what we were talking about, but he said something, and I corrected him. I said, "Well, no, Eben, you can't look at it that way, because don't forget, blah blah." And she looks at me just with this expression, and she says, "You can't talk to him that way." And I said, "What way?" I said, "You mean I can't challenge his statements and beliefs?" And she was just in such awe of him. And it was just very humorous and funny how we worked through that. And yeah, we have great conversations. But I'll be the first one to tell him, you're kind of thinking of that as if you're still a materialist. So maybe you want to shift and remember, what you always say. And it just really speaks to how powerful that materialist world is, because especially in the West, that materialist view is so powerful that our very language kind of conspires against us when we want to talk about something like time, not being malleable. And Eben falls into that sometimes. You just really can't help yourself. Those ingrained, primary beliefs really stick with us, even as we move out of them and expand our minds. So, yeah.
It is a process, that's for sure. I say it's like a gift that you kind of unwrap all the time.
Yes, exactly. And meditation can be that way too. I've had all kinds of different experiences where I've gone deep into consciousness, and sometimes I'll just be given this most amazing kind of, I'll say, sort of, people describe them different ways, but a ball of information that you can't really just understand except with some gestalt. And it takes time to sort of unpack it all. And you near-death experiencers, I understand you've had one as well. You are giving these things just sort of unbidden. You're not even looking, and suddenly you're handed this stuff, information, this whatever you want to call it, and you got to deal with it. And so many people come out with having the most transformative effects. Very, very inspiring.
Yeah, you got the shock factor. It takes a long time to get to the wow factor because you're in shock and denial.
Yeah, and it depends on when it happened and what your belief systems were.
Yeah.
I heard you telling Eben your experience back in the 80s. So a lot different sort of environment back then. Even now, at least most health professionals have heard of them, even though they might not be, overly accepting all of them. At least they're aware that these kinds of things happen. And us as lay people, I do know, you must know of Raymond Moody, of course, the famous person who wrote Life After Life, who studied near-death experiences in medical school back in the 70s and wrote this amazing book. And he talks about how much back then people just really didn't know what they were. And, often he was a medical doctor with a specialty in psychiatry. And so it was no wonder he was kind of exposed to these things. But a lot of times people thought they were just having psychotic breaks or different things like that. And nowadays it's a lot different. And now, thanks to him and many others, lay people have an understanding. And all the way full circle, Raymond in recent years has been teaching workshops in what he calls nonsense. So that's where, when near-death experiences are exposed, like we were just talking about, to these big balls of information, and they don't really make sense. And so it takes time to unpack it all. But he wanted to teach people how to sort of have that ability to interact in a nonsensical way. And sure enough, one of his students has finally, after taking his course, had a near-death experience. And they were able to use that information to manage their consciousness in a much different way than someone like you, back in the 80s, where it was just completely foreign and unheard of. He at least was equipped a little bit to know what to do and how to interact. Just amazing how far we've come.
Yeah, I didn't even have a word to go to the library to look up. I never heard near-death experience. And months later, after my experience, I was walking through the living room, started dinner, and Oprah Winfrey was on, and she was new at the time. And I didn't even catch the name near-death experience. I just heard them talking about dying, and they were supposedly in heaven. And I never scoffed at anything as much as I did those people. And I stood there like, what liars? How stupid do they think we are? I started to go to the kitchen and I was stopped in my tracks. I thought, why does that sound so familiar? And oh my gosh, I remembered it. And it all come from, I'm sure I remembered it as soon as it happened, as soon as I was
Wow.
back in the wheelchair, but I couldn't talk about it then. And then I had to grieve because I had lost twins in that. And then I was afraid that I would have another tubal pregnancy. But I wanted a baby so bad that I couldn't go get fixed again. And so, I was in that fear stage for so long, but I heard them and they're such weirdos. And then and I thought, why does that sound so familiar? I could feel it through my whole body, this stillness. And then it was like this tug of war. Like it happened. It couldn't have. It did happen. It didn't. It was like this. I'm like, then I started shaking all over. It was real. It was real. And I told my husband at the time, I told him that night after supper, I sent the kids to the room. I said, I need to talk to your dad a minute. And I sat him down at the table and I said, I need to tell you something. And I shook all over because when I came back from the near-death experience in the chair, I was shaking. I was shock or, from my blood loss. I don't know, but I was just freezing cold. And he looked at me and he said, I know how it sounds, but I know you, and I know you're telling me the truth. But it felt like that should be the end of it, but then it didn't feel like the end of it.
No, it's just the beginning of it, really,
Yeah.
right? As the
Yeah.
implications really sink in.
Yeah. So,
But yeah, that power of the belief, though, it even affected you. Even after it happened, you resisted, and so many people do that. And that's that power of believing, as we do in our society, that only the physical world is real, and everything else we just make fun of as some kind of hallucination. Very, very common. And yet, when it happens to you, you realize. And so, wouldn't it be a different world if we all understood that we were primarily spiritual beings, and that we use these physical bodies to learn and grow and teach and exist, but that our consciousness continues? And that's where we're headed. That's where we think we're headed, because so many, including you, have had these experiences. We just can't keep denying them. Silly.
Yeah. And after that NDE in 1986, I was pregnant again about 2 months later. And all of a sudden, I looked at the night sky by myself one night. I remember drowning at age 5. Like I had completely forgotten all about it. And I went to my family. Did I drown? I said, I said, yeah, you did. So we didn't tell anybody. They didn't want my dad to be mad and his family be mad at her and stuff. And so, because they had a child die at 9 months, their firstborn, I was their 6th child. And she was afraid, my mom was afraid they'd blame her. And so, that's why it was kept hidden. But I had full, like this movie trailer, opened up the sky and watched the whole thing front to back. And I took me over and I said, I'm like, did I die? Did I drown when I was little? And,
imagine if you had remembered that as a child, your life. Children who have those experiences and don't forget, they grow up a little differently with a little bit different awareness. But something tells me you had it way deep down. And that maybe is why you were resisting and denying it until whoops, nope, it happened again.
Yeah. And
wow.
And so, after I remembered it, then I started remembering bits and pieces. And I remembered right after the drowning. I remember, after I woke up choking, I was carried over my brother's shoulder. And then my brother and my mom and sister went up to the house. I was left there alone on the road. And then I remembered what happened then. And then I remembered what happened that night when I went to bed and had like spiritual experiences after that and stuff. And so, bit by bit, it all started coming. And I'm so glad everything didn't come at once, because I probably would have been so overwhelmed and like probably mentally break. It would have been too much. And so I'm glad it's kind of spoon fed to me over the years. And, they say, you process your NDE, and I'm thinking, well, I'm glad we process slowly, maybe some more than others, because it is now that I'm 60 and I can look back at all of it. I'm glad that I wasn't given all that at once.
Interesting. Yeah, it can be very overwhelming. Sometimes people who are trying to cultivate these kinds of experiences, they want, a Kundalini awakening or some big splash. And boy, once you get it, it can be very challenging. So it is better, I think, to come short, smaller pieces that you can process little by little.
What was your life like? So you started like learning about these binary, I can't say it right, these beats and stuff. I mean, before all this come about, like where was you at spiritually, or how this happened with you.
Well, I was one of those kids who didn't really grow up in a strict belief system. You know, a lot of kids now grow up as strict materialists where, you know, none of this religion nonsense, just forget about it. And others are the other extreme. And my family came from that other extreme, sort of a religious evangelical fundamentalist household. But my mother, that's how she grew up. She rejected all of that. She didn't reject all of the beliefs, but what she rejected was the strictness of it all. And so while we went to Methodist church and everything, I never was told anything about God, this, that, and the other. I was kind of just left to find out for myself. And I remember asking a minister once, I said, you know, I don't think I believe in God. And I was busy going to church camp on the beautiful Oregon coast, and I loved going to church camp. But I said, you know, and this was at camp where I asked this minister, and he said, well, that's okay. It's not really for everyone.
Really?
And I was relieved, right? And so I said, well, can I still come to camp? And he said, of course you can. And so I was there for the fellowship. And, you know, when we would say prayers, they would tell us, go out into the woods and commune with God. And I would say, well, I don't have to commune with God because I don't believe in God. And that minister told me it was okay. So I would commune with the ferns, with the trees, with the sand, with the ocean, with nature. And that's where I felt very comfortable, was just feeling like I was connected to something greater. I didn't think of it as God, and no minister decided to kind of connect that dot for me. And it kind of gave me this freedom from any sort of dogma. Whether it's, you know, from one religion or materialism, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, because God really is all those things in nature.
Yeah, I didn't have any sort of dogma. And so as I was going through life, I was very open-minded. And I had what I came to call from being a young child, a truth meter, I called it. And so I would sort of know when someone was telling me the truth. And I tested it myself over time, and I learned, yep, I can know when someone's telling me the truth. And so when I heard all the different dogmas, or, you know, went to physics class in junior high school, I didn't believe any of that was ultimate truth. And so what I got very interested in was exploring all different kinds of belief systems and finding the universal truths. What do they all say is true? And there are a few things. There are some universal truths out there. And those were the things that really interested me. And lo and behold, as I got older and learned about near-death experiences, near-death experiencers are tapping into those universal truths. And so by the time I got to before meeting Eben, I had for maybe 3 or 4 years, I was busy in a 25-year career. I was raising a daughter who was a teenager at the time, but I had all of these beliefs up in my head. But what I wanted was to start generating experience. I didn't have anything happen to me like you're describing quite that dramatically, or like Eben, but I began over time to learn different types of techniques to create those kinds of experiences. And at first, what I ran into was my own distracting thoughts, right? When you sit to try to meditate, which everyone says is so good for you, all I ever had was this voice running through my head that wouldn't stop. And I, over time, learned that we all have that going on. And the one way that I could get it to quiet down was through particular sound, these binaural beats, or things like tuning forks or crystal bowls, brass bowls, anything that sort of has that kind of monotonous wah, wah, wah sound. That's actually a binaural beat. So gongs and crystal bowls and tuning forks, they're actually emitting natural binaural beats. And I learned that's what kind of grabs us and kind
I
of.
wonder if it makes us quiet because we're listening instead of yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Well, Eben will say that these tones are actually affecting the lower brainstem and really bringing us back to a more primitive form of consciousness before we had our thinking brain. That's the neocortex. That's the part up here that humans have that, that we think is so superior to all other animals. But very often it's just those thoughts and beliefs that get in our way from really reaching that real truth. But sound played a very critical role in helping me to quiet that inner voice and to find a way to profoundly relax the body, but still keep the mind aware and alert. And this is where I really began to make a lot of progress, first running into emotional trauma that I didn't really even know I had, but just things I hadn't processed from when I was a child had gotten stored into my system. And so when you first start to go deep and find your inner truth, often the first thing you run into are those sort of stored emotional traumas. And so I had to go through some processes of releasing those. And the sound played a very critical role. Sometimes the sound seems to trigger anxieties and emotions that are already in our system. And once I figured that out, I learned I could use these recordings to sort of trigger these emotions and release them. And a lot of the emotions were related to deep sadness, deep feelings of abandonment. I think these are very universal feelings that a lot of us have when we go deep within. And part of that is this idea that we're separate from this something greater, God, great spirit, universe, whatever you want to call it. We believe we're separated from that. And it sure seems like that when we're born, especially in the Western society. And so we seem to create these experiences in our lives that just seem to make those feelings of abandonment more powerful. And in my case, it was my parents getting divorced. And my father had been in Vietnam for a couple years. I was about 6 or 7 years old when he came home after 2 different tours. And my parents decided that they had, grown apart and wanted to get a divorce. And they sat me down with my 2 brothers, one a year older, one a year younger. And they asked us, which parent would you like to live with? And my brothers were just very upset and said, oh my gosh, how can you ask us a question like that? Even at that age, they just didn't know how to pick. And I was thinking, well, gosh, my dad hasn't been around. He left me. So why would I want to be with him? I very clearly chose my mother and said that out loud. And so I really just rejected my father emotionally. I thought, well, if he's not there to love me, then I don't need him. I don't need him to give me that love. And whoop, I just sort of walled that off. And of course, it was much, much later that I realized it was affecting my ability to form relationship, my ability to allow myself to be loved. I was very good at directing love towards others, but not so good at allowing that love to come back towards me. And so really kind of triggering those kinds of feelings, making that connection intellectually, but also emotionally, really helped me to start work through all of that. And then once you release any of these feelings, abandonment or what have you that you might have, it gets replaced. You feel a greater connection. You feel that there's other support out there, and that frankly, we're never alone. As long as we know how to tap into that state, we can always feel as though we're connected to something. And each of us is a critical part of that whole. Eben and I often say, no soul left behind, because whether we realize it or not, we're all part of this greater soul that connects us all. And the more of us who can make that connection on our own or through these types of near-death experiences, sometimes they can be cultivated, sometimes it just happens unbidden. The more of us who come to know that, not just believe that, but know it firsthand, that's when we'll start to see, hopefully, some real change in our world.
Makes me think of how Eben shut down when he was rejected by his biological parents, that they didn't want to see him.
We've discussed this, and when we first met, and I remember asking him, you talk about this amazing love. Do you love yourself? And I was surprised, actually. He said, well, no, how could I love myself? And he had already been through other therapy around his adoption at birth and how he was given up for adoption at 11 days old. He was taken to the children's home, and it was 4 months later that the papers were signed that he could actually be adopted. So he spent those 3.5 months sort of in limbo, and he went on a hunger strike. He wouldn't eat. He now has the understanding that he felt that rejection from his mother early on. And
failure to thrive.
Yeah, as a baby, he didn't have a story to put around it. He just had this visceral, empty feeling. It was there and then it wasn't. And so that was his abandonment wound. And so we shared that kind of story with each other, where mine was more where I was at a verbal age, where I could understand what I was doing. His was not. And so it's much harder to reckon with those kinds of, I call them baby wounds, because they're things that happen when we're babies and we don't really have an understanding of how to really, you're drowning is one of those situations where you must have remembered that, but not on the surface level. And other things that may have happened to us, conversations or misunderstandings. That the one story I like to tell that really illustrates this well, I learned from one of my spiritual teachers, and he was sort of an energy healer, intuitive type. And he was working with a young adult, a woman who had just had all kinds of issues with self-esteem, couldn't have a relationship, hold a job, just really not doing well in life. And she had this memory from when she was a child. Her mother was dying of cancer. That much she knew. And but she didn't know a whole lot more than that, except for when she heard her mother say, "I wish my daughter had never been born." And when she heard that, she heard it in the way that the only way she could understood, that her mom must not love her, that her mother doesn't want her, and that's why she wished she'd never been born. But through kind of recasting and remembering the context of what really that all meant, is that her mother was regretting the idea that she knew she was dying, and that she regretted she'd had a daughter because now she had to leave her daughter, who of course she loved dearly and did not want to leave behind. And once the daughter was able to tap into that feeling that, yes, she truly was loved by her mother, then that sort of started to help her heal from all of that. And in some cases where children are abused and really aren't loved by their parents, that's where tapping into that greater source of love can really be so helpful. Yeah. And these things, they stick with us. And Eben, even to this day, he still has residual sort of feelings from around all that. So very challenging to really eliminate. But that what these things do is they really become food for our soul, food for our growth, opportunities to respond in ways that help us learn as opposed to send us into deeper spirals. So anything like this can be viewed as an opportunity for growth.
I start out my memoir with my first memory, and I'm in a baby bed and I'm praying to God. Now you think, how would a baby, young enough to be in a baby bed, have any concept of God? But in our language, it wasn't verbal, it was inside talking to myself. And I had complete language. And I said, this memory just never left me. And it made no sense, but I thought, this is my earliest memory and I'm going chronological. I'm going to put it in there. Something just told me, you don't have to understand it. Somebody will. Just go ahead, So I put it in there, and I'm sitting in the baby bed and the room is dim and I can see my siblings running out in the living room through the open doorway. There's a light on in the living room. And I know, and I'm telling God, I say, hey, you sent me the wrong family. And I'm waiting to be switched, because I have this memory. Em was talking about reincarnation a while ago, but I have this memory of, I guess, being in heaven, because I was in this beautiful, just white is all memory I have, place, and every wish was like my command. Everything I was perfectly taken care of. If I ever just started to want something, it was there. And so I'm waiting. I'm like, they're going to take care of this, and I'm waiting, and I'm telling God, these people are weird and they don't like me. And I know there's been a mistake. You sent me the wrong family. Like, this can't be my family. This isn't what family is. I don't belong here. And I'm waiting. And the silence was my answer, that I'm alone now. I'm on my own. And that abandonment feeling, like I was abandoned from heaven. And, I always had that memory, pop up now and then. Now, what in the world is that? And then when I remember the drowning, and then I remember after the drowning and all these things, and then I'm starting to put it together as years go by. And then I can tell you how all this is real, is because in 5th grade, you said something a while ago, made me think of it. I was sitting there bored, looking out the window. I was a really bad student. I didn't pay attention. And Mr. Cooper, science teacher, started talking about failure to thrive. And he was saying how babies in orphanages and old people in nursing homes can will themselves to die because they don't have love. They have everything medically, everything, necessity taken care of, but they don't have love. And I was like ready to boom, just bust. And I wanted to stand on top of my desk and start screaming, we got to do something about this. We got to do something about it right now. And I realize now that was the me, my soul me coming out, that come out at the 5-year-old drowning. Because during my 5-year-old drownings, I hovered above the pond. Something showed me that I wasn't loved by my family. Like, oh, I didn't know that. I knew my siblings didn't like me, and I knew my dad didn't like me, but I thought my mom loved me. And then an audible voice said, children are sent here to be loved. That is why God sends them here. So then when I woke up after the drowning, I have all this knowledge. And then my brother just sets me down the road. My mom and sister, my brother, they go up the house and leave me alone. And I know it's true now. They don't love me.
Aw.
And I'm like, crap. I'm like, I want to go back to the pond because I was flying. I was this little ghost kid. I was just having fun. And I want to go back exploring. I know drowning really, really hurts, but I'm not going to fight it this time. I'm going to go back. And just as I started to, this angel appeared, says, no, don't go. And you'll have a lot of love someday, and all this. And so it's like, as I get older, all these pieces, it's like this puzzle just starts coming together. And I say now it feels like God has this great big 1,000-word puzzle piece all put together, and he throws it down on earth and says, now go live your life. Because it feels like all the pieces start coming together and fitting to make me know this was all real. Because I have to know, I have to know myself before I can come on here and say, this is my near-death experience, this is da-da-da, and put my life and my reputation into this. I have to first know. And so I'm always curious of and it seems like some trauma in childhood leads us somehow ultimately on these paths.
Somehow, and it doesn't have to be, sexual abuse or something like that. And how interesting that you discovered your family didn't really love you. And, is that really true? Your family doesn't love you? None of it?
Hate my guts. They absolutely despise me. In fact, one of my sisters told me in a Facebook message here, I really always did hate you.
I wonder if it's because you were, the last of 6 children or something.
My oldest sister is mentally disabled, and then I have a brother, and then a middle sister who's mom said she started lying the day she learned to talk. She's a compulsive liar, very attention getter. She was very smart. My dad laughed at everything she did. The boys, she just had my brothers wrapped around her fingers, And then there's me, the tiny little runt, the baby. And I was prissy, like girly girl. And so my mom spoiled me because my sister was a chubby, boyish tomboy, and she's just like my dad's favorite and outrun with the boys. And then my other sister's mentally disabled. And so I'm like this little baby doll, which wasn't love.
So they resented you, or you were just
I was a spoiled little brat, and I was a tattletale. I was always seeing right from wrong, and I was always telling what was wrong, and they would get in trouble.
Yeah, well, there you go.
And so it just as teenage years come, they are older, so they're doing things that are wrong, and I quit telling on them, but still, it was just different. And I was more going to church with my grandma, and they weren't have anything to do with that. And then I got to be the bad teenager, trying to be like them, trying to be accepted by them, but still at my core, and so I don't know. I was just different. And I think the drowning changed me. Yeah. That gives me like a high moral compass where all this bad stuff could be going on in our family, and I'm looking through it at different eyes than they are. Like I walked in one night and I was like 11, and my teenage siblings are 3 of them. My sister and 2 brothers. They're getting ready to poison my stepfather. They're getting ready to put rat poison in his coffee pot, and he's asleep in the next room with my mom. And when he wakes up, he's going to get his coffee thermos and hit the road on the semi. And I walked in and caught him, and they said, now that you've seen it, you've got to be involved in it. And I'm like, no. And they said, well, whatever happens to us from now on because of him, because he was abusive, and he was going to make us move to the country away from the city and from their friends. And it was all your fault. And I'm like, no. I could see ahead. I could see him wrecking, and I could see this big fire. I could see people upset. Maybe others would be hurt. And no, I just knew right from wrong. Yeah, they didn't. Yeah. They didn't.
Yeah, some of us do. I did it as well. And I didn't have a near-death experience that I'm aware of, but I just seem to have this understanding like you're describing. But you actually had a vision of his upcoming death. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I could see exactly what could possibly happen. I mean, I seen a big fire. I seen this big semi on fire and him in it and people come running trying to rescue. I mean, I've seen it all.
Wow.
And I don't know if that's what would have happened, but I'm just like, and I knew my mom loved him and I knew she would be so upset. And I said, no, I said, Mom loves him.
Plus, you just can't kill. That's just not,
No.
it's just not allowed.
It's not a solution to any problem.
No, exactly. That's a universal truth. Yeah. You don't kill each other. We don't kill each other. Yeah.
And so later my sister tried to get me to jump off the train bridge. She was afraid I would tell on her.
Oh my gosh.
Jump. And I realized she's afraid I'm going to tell. She wants me to jump off this bridge so she don't get in trouble. You know, it's just their mindset versus my mindset. Not that I was ever all perfect. You know, I'm not saying that.
Of course not. Neither have I been perfect. Yes, of course.
Yeah. So want to explain more about these beats? I'm starting to understand, like, so I'm thinking of it as you listen to this and like it puts your mind on the beats. And so it opens you up, kind of like prayer. Like if I'm praying, I'm asking God something, I'm listening for the answer. It opens up this space.
Right. And so they can be used for all kinds of things. Certainly the idea of getting quiet within and exploring within consciousness, but some people use them just to reduce anxiety or help them sleep, for example, without any of the kind of spiritual longings. And we did do a pilot study in a Manhattan psychiatric practice several years ago. And we found the doctor in this practice, Dr. Anna Yusum, she found that people had a 26% reduction in anxiety just after 2 weeks of listening. Now, her control group were people that had only talk therapy and did not listen to the recordings. And they saw a 7% reduction in anxiety over the same time period. So just by adding in these recordings, they were having all kinds of, what they were doing was measuring anxiety with a commonly used form in the psychiatric research called the state trait anxiety inventory. So they measured two different types of anxiety, and the anxiety that reduced the most was the trait anxiety, the anxiety that we kind of bring with us into different situations, as opposed to a state anxiety, which arises in certain situations. And so it was rather remarkable to her as a psychiatrist to see that trait anxiety was what was reduced the most.
Now, what's that mean?
But the trait is a trait of your personality. So you're naturally, you feel anxious in all situations kind of thing. So it was trait anxiety, someone's nature of feeling anxious, as opposed to state anxiety, which is only related to, say, if you're in a dark room or you're on a tall bridge and you're afraid of heights, right? So state versus trait. And so that's why it was so remarkable. But people were starting to have, and it was, I receive all kinds of stories all the time from people, but it was fortunate to have these recorded in an actual study that got published in a medical journal in early 2020. But she found that people were having all kinds of breakthroughs. So there was a man, I think, or it might have been a woman, can't remember, but a person who had lots and lots of relationship issues. They were in a toxic relationship, just couldn't figure out how to get themselves out of it. And during the listening sessions, they found a way. Suddenly they found themselves not in the relationship anymore. And I found that doing this sort of thing, listening to these recordings in a systematic fashion, going to other types of meditation retreats, finding that combination of techniques that each of us will find uniquely to our particular makeup. I found that doing this over time really did start to unveil some things I wasn't necessarily aware of before. And it really, what I learned was this was just more of who I truly am. And the more you kind of listen and do these types of exercises, you kind of shift from the inside out. And then the outside world has a way of readjusting itself. So that's how I look at this person who was in the toxic relationship, that they were able to shift their inner world enough that their outer world just kind of took care of itself. And this is something that can happen, say, if you're really anxious about learning your purpose in life. So many people want to know, why am I here? What is my purpose? And I was no exception. And I used to think that when I discovered what my purpose was, it would actually be a task that I would do or a job that I would hold. And what I learned over time is that your purpose is really just to manifest the unique aspects of who you are fully into this world. And the more that you kind of bring those elements forward, again, the more that the outer world seems to take care of itself. So I left a job of, I spent about, I think I told you I spent several years, I called it my spiritual boot camp years. I spent going to workshops, this and that. And during that time, listening to lots of these audio recordings in systematic ways, over time that I did this, I ended up leaving a bad marriage. I ended up leaving a 25-year career. I ended up moving from the city into the country. I ended up meeting Eben Alexander and beginning a relationship with him. And all of those things took place without me really having to do a lot. They just, the events kind of just started to present themselves. Whereas before I was thinking, I really want to leave my job. Where should I go? I would look for, in the want ads, this and that, and try to find something. But once I was able to just get calmer within and get more centered and grounded within, that's when it just kind of happened. Now, it's not like you can't, if you proceed on a path like this, it's not like you just sit around and wait for the universe to provide. You still have to take action, make decisions, and take action in your life. But those actions seem to be go a little more smoothly and a little more easily once you're able to really align, I say, with that higher aspect of who you truly are. Higher is a little, I don't like to use higher, lower, more larger, grander, broader aspect, more expanded part of who you truly are. And all of us can tap into this wisdom. And so meditation is one way to get there, but so many of us, I was one of them, have trouble quieting the mind. So tools like this audio technology can help us get there a little more quickly than, say, like Tibetan monks who have to meditate for 10,000 hours before they become experts. We can use some tricks and tools. Now in the West, we're used to just taking a pill and thinking that everything will be better. It's not quite as simple as that. But there are techniques that many of us can use, whether they're breathing techniques, movement techniques, mantras, mudras, all kinds of things. I encourage people, if you don't have a personal practice, to start to develop one. And if you want to try these recordings as one option, you can go to sacredacoustics.com, look for the free download button, and put in your email, and we'll send you a link to a free 20-minute recording. Many listeners use this recording only as their daily practice and find great benefit. But there's also the same recordings we used in the pilot study. Look for the Whole Mind Bundle, and you'll get the same collection of recordings and listening protocols that we used in that pilot study, along with many other recordings. There's so many to choose from, and they're all very unique, one to the next. Each has the potential for providing a different type of experience, but starting with that free Om download and the Whole Mind Bundle is an excellent place to start to kind of get a feel for how you might respond. Also on the website is what I call a series of free training videos. And that's where myself and Eben, in a few brief guest appearances, we explain, what to expect, common concerns, how to set intention, and, the way to get the most out of a regular practice. So lots and lots of tools available on sacredacoustics.com.
Wasn't there something in Eben's experience about the or?
Yes. Well, when he went to what he calls the core realm, remember he had that earth room eye view, and then he went through a spinning white light into the Gateway Valley, where he had just all kinds of beautiful earth-like features. But then it shifted into this, what he calls the core realm, where he went past all of that. And that's where he heard this sound Om. And other near-death experiencers and others who've had spiritual experiences talk about hearing this beautiful resonant sound. And in fact, when he came back, you're remembering, because in his book, Proof of Heaven, that's what he called God. He called God Om, because God just seemed to have, religious trappings, and he wanted to move beyond that. And it was that sense of vibration, and that, as you described it, feeling of being taken care of, and that everything would be all right. And it was all in that setting of feeling that, what he calls the ultimate infinite infinite and eternal type of resonance that you might expect to hear from a most powerful, omniscient God force, would be a sound like that. And so we created this Om recording. Kevin and I, my audio engineer partner, we had already determined from ourselves, not through any religious traditions, but through just personal practice, that sort of vocalizing that Om, kind of doing that at the beginning of a sound journey, as we came to call them, would sort of enhance our effects. So it's almost like when we create the vibration in our own body using our voice, our vocal cords, that somehow we're able to more easily connect with the vibrations of the sounds. And so we would experiment, different pitches, different volumes, different ways of vocalizing that Om. And I really enjoyed a very deep, resonant kind of Om, because when I did it deeply, I would feel vibrations in my heart. And this was very important to me, to be able to feel my heart and know more about it. And so you can try this yourself, with or without the recordings, any of your listeners. Just make that Om sound, but do it higher, lower. You can also do different vowel sounds and see if you notice the vibrations in different parts of your body. Sometimes if people are looking for a particular healing effect in a certain part of their body, they can use their voice to find which specific vibration makes me notice that area, and then do that and send healing energy there using your mental and spiritual intention. So this is all just a lot on that sound of Om. But of course, the Hindus love this part of Eben's story, because it really validates what they say is at the center of everything, and that is that Om sound. Om is critically important to the Hindu faith. And what's so interesting too about Eben's story is that lots of different religious faiths wrote to him and said, wow, you just validated our Muslim faith, our Jewish tradition, our, whatever it may be, Astrosarianism. Almost all the religions have written to Eben and say that somehow he's touched on part of what their religious spiritual tradition tells them. And so this really speaks to that idea that near-death experiencers are touching these universal truths that can be found throughout all of the religions, but none of the religions seem to have it exactly right. They all seem to have a very critical piece of it.
My religious truth is actually the person God. A lot of people say, well, God's not a person, and you felt him in nature and felt him in truth, and I do as well. And I guess the best example I could give is after 16 years of marriage, my ex, he come to me one day, which wasn't really a surprise. And he said, you can have the house, you can have the kids. This is how much I agree to pay child support. And I'm going to take the kids right now for their first weekend visitation. And he left. And I was always the type person, because of my childhood, I didn't cry in front of people. I was too proud. Like, you could beat me in the head over and over, and you won't see me shed a tear. I was that type. You ain't going to get that out of me. And, so I was not a crier. And so after he left, the house was so quiet, it hurt my ears. It was like so loud. The quiet was so loud, because like my family was gone. And I went in the bathroom, shut the door, and I'm crying. My family didn't love me. Now my husband of 16 years don't love me, going down that rabbit hole. And I'm just sobbing and sobbing, and my face was so hot. Then all of a sudden, in front of the mirror, I heard my child.
Mm.
And these cold tears of joy running down my steamy hot face. And I'm like, you're right. You're the only family I need. And I got up and I'm rejoicing. And I look back now and I thank God that God spoke to me like that in that moment, because a few hours later, my ex called me and wanted me to go with him to a party down at the river. He had his boat down there. And I just danced all night long with my bare feet. Bottom of my feet was black. I was for like a month. because I danced for hours, all by myself, not paying attention to anybody else. I was rejoicing and nobody needed to know why but me. The whole night, my ex is mad, wanting me to get in the boat. And I had filed domestic violence charges. He had almost killed me and the kids in that boat, a few months prior. And I knew now as I'm dancing, he wants to go kill me in that boat. He probably has a brick and a rope, I was going to throw me in there.
Wow.
But I just danced all night. I was just rejoicing in my own self. And that self-love, like Eben, when something shut down, when he found out his biological family had other children and they weren't ready to see him, or, and he shut down. And I think you lose that self-love. And like you with your parents' divorce. And it's when we lose that self-love where we feel unworthy of love, like the world has told us, everybody's loved but you. And these are the reasons why.
Exactly.
And I got that back all from that word, my child. And that was all it took. And I look back and I think that saved my life. I mean, yes, it was time. It's just like wonderful. I feel so much better now. I got clarity, but now I see how it saved my life, because I would have still been trying to please him. Even though I
Right.
knew what was going to happen, I probably would have still tried to please him.
And then
I've
hopefully you didn't care that he didn't love you anymore because he
Right.
was not necessarily good for you.
Yeah.
Wow.
I had God's love, and that's all I needed.
Yeah.
And I was just rejoicing. And I'm just curious, you as a child, and like, are you the same way now? It's like, this is your God is in trees. I mean, in nature, it's in finding truth, or is it after hearing Eben's story or other NDEs, has it changed it? I'm just curious.
It hasn't changed. I think that we need to have that personal firsthand experience to really inform that belief. And so far, I have not encountered God in that way. I encounter God, honestly, I encounter God as an equal. I always feel as though I'm co-creating and that God is equal to me. And I don't know if that's arrogance or I'll get taught another lesson over time. But that's how I feel. I feel that I'm a co-creator with God, and that it has not come to me in that fashion up to this time. But it's possible that it could. And at that time, I will be open to modifying how I kind of look at it, because I think it's really important for us not to just have sort of blind belief, but to have it informed by personal experience. And so I want to be careful with making sure that anything I'm espousing, just as you are, I believe, is really authentic to my personal experience. And so far, I haven't encountered it in that fashion, but it doesn't mean that I won't.
It makes me think of Raymond Moody. I heard him say on an interview one time that all these near-death experiences that he studied, somebody asked, "Was you a believer?" He was like, "No."
Yeah.
And then later I heard him say, not until he heard Jeffrey Olson's story. He said that made him a believer.
Yeah. Yeah. Raymond is funny about that. He's funny. Sometimes he'll tell these stories doctors tell him. He'll like, I give up, but he won't ever go. He goes back and forth with whether he's a believer or not. But he has a really interesting and important way, I think, of describing that we don't believe in God, but we all have our own relationships with God. It's a connection. It shouldn't just be a mental belief, but it should be an actual felt connection that is real. And so I think I respect him for holding to his truth, because he hasn't had the experience. And so until he does, it's kind of hard to go all the way there.
Yeah. And I'd heard him once say that they had lost a baby. And I wondered if that was what prompted him to get so curious about near-death experiences, is wondering.
Well, to my understanding, his motivation was through his interest in Greek philosophy and reading about Plato, who writes a near-death experience about this soldier named And that is what kind of had it in his mind.
I heard that too.
When he got into medical school and started hearing stories. And George Ritchie was the first, one of the first NDEs he learned of, and it all just made so much sense to him. So
yeah, and it's so funny that it can make sense. It can spark curiosity, but it doesn't get in here. That's just curious to me. Yeah.
But it also speaks to that Western mindset, because we want to have proof. We want to believe that all of this can be found in the physical world, somehow proven, because we've been taught the physical world is all that's real. And as a medical doctor, that's his training. He also was raised an atheist. And so he didn't have anything to do with religion at all. Came upon it this way. But it almost makes the research more authentic when he's not a believer, when he holds that sort of final decision until all the data's in, right? And so a lot of the modern day researchers, Bruce Grayson, who researches NDEs, Jim Tucker, who researches past life memories in children, they're not necessarily wouldn't use that term believers. They're actually very open-minded skeptics. But that's what makes them able to evaluate certain stories of, okay, this one's authentic, maybe this one isn't. And they're psychiatrists, and so they understand the workings of the human mind. They know the difference between a psychotic episode and a near-death experience. And yet they're able to kind of keep that objective viewpoint. So it does come in handy, although I think Pim van Lommel, a longtime Dutch cardiologist who has studied near-death experiencers, especially their transformative effects over time, he's finally now coming down firmly on the side of consciousness is eternal. So they're coming around, these doctors.
It seems like there's some on the spectrum that are discussing and studying near-death experiences that want people to move away from religion. That like church is bad all of a sudden, religion is bad, and judgment is bad. And then we have near-death experiencers and researchers, I suppose, that are like telling their NDE and quoting the Bible as they're telling their NDE.
Yeah,
like show. I'm like, we're way on these sides. And I think in the audience, of course, everybody's different person, as an audience, but I think sometimes the audience, because I've heard preachers tell me that, oh no, I'm not going to tell people to go to your NDE group. Yeah, they've come to me about their NDE, but it's the devil. I got to protect my flock. And like, are you saying I'm the devil? You got to protect people from me? I mean, like, if you're not open to
that's
it,
pretty much what they're saying. Yeah,
yeah,
that's exactly what
send
we've been told that as well.
And so we have all these extremes, of because I get scared, honestly, when I see. Or even when somebody contacts me and says, I went to an NDE group and I'm told I'm not allowed to say Jesus and God about my experience. I'm not allowed to say heaven. I'm not allowed to say afterlife. I'm like, what? And like, oh yeah, they're talking about ghosts and like stuff that I would consider witchcraft. And so we have fear. Christians have fear of NDEs when they're used like that. And then we have fear on the other side where they're afraid that they're going to get too Christian or too religious or this is like, where's God in this?
Well, one of the very critical things that Pim van Lommel found, and you probably have heard this too, is that one of the big things that near-death experiencers go through is that they become less religious but more spiritual. So they find the more universal aspects of it all, of spirituality. And I know Jeff Olson, he's a Mormon, and he can quote Bible scripture like nobody's business, and he does. And yet, when you have a one-on-one conversation with him, you find that he knows that the Mormon religion and Christianity are not exclusive. That it certainly is. Informs on some aspects of spirituality, but they're not the answer for everyone. And others, Mary Neal, who also had a very powerful experience and communed with Jesus the whole time during her NDE while she was in her 30-minute drowning and afterwards during her recovery. And that connection with Jesus was incredibly important to her. And she can speak in that Christian language, but at the same time, she knows that it's not, believe in Jesus or you'll never get to heaven, that extreme. Christian beliefs. So yeah, there's a lot of good things wrapped up in religions, and then there's some controlling things that aren't so good. So we really just need to find the balance that works for us and the language that works for us. The Sanskrit language in the Hindu tradition has words for all kinds of things that the English language would never have. And so for them, that language works very well. And for us, I feel our English language is a little bit limiting. And if some people find the religious language works for them, then, there's no one answer for all of us. That's all I can say.
I guess what you come from small communities, and there's a church, and they'll tell you, like when I wasn't Catholic anymore, when my ex and I got divorced, okay, his family's Catholic. What am I now? I take our adopted kids, I remarried to this church. Well, I'm sitting there and they're saying Catholics are going to hell. And I'm like,
yeah,
my oldest sons, they're Catholic, and I just adored my mother and father-in-law from my ex-husband, and they're not going to hell. And they helped me a lot in my growth. And so like, come on, kids. And when I get them walk out of a church, it, because I got 10 kids following me, and then we go to a Catholic church, and then it just doesn't fit right either. It's not spiritual enough and feel in my heart what I grew up with in Christian church going with my grandma. And so it's just kind of like hard to find this like big embrace for everybody to so people stop saying you're right, I'm right, you're wrong, and
Unity Church has a little bit of that going on.
Well, see, I went to North Carolina. I spoke at a Unity Church in North Carolina for Ions, and they attacked me afterwards because I'm pro-life. And they said, you need to remember what church you're in. And I'm like, I don't know anything about Unity Church. I do now, but I didn't then.
Wow. Like, so yeah, that's an experience. I was careful when I mentioned that because I thought they probably do have some rules, and you found them. But I have to point out Christopher Kerr, he's a hospice doctor at Hospice Buffalo, and he doesn't have an interest in the afterlife. He has an interest in the process of people dying. And he did some amazing studies. This wonderful book called Death is But a Dream came out about a year ago. And all of the study is written in there along with all kinds of very interesting stories. But something he found is that lots and lots of religious folks are expecting to see religious figures and things like that. What he discovered was people in hospice start sort of moving between both worlds. Well, they'll start to see the souls of departed loved ones, their loved ones who died previously. They are not running into Jesus and Buddha and Kuan Yin and all of the religious subjects. They're running into their own family members and loved ones. And they find that of all the different things that showed up that they asked for, was it deceased loved ones, alive loved ones, pets, something else, and religious figures. Religious figures came in last. And so religion becomes less important as we're lying there dying. Although my grandmother may not have told you that as she lay dying, I'm pretty sure she had her religious thoughts going on. But I know when I had a mediumship reading once, and this grandmother came to me through the reading, and I was told that she said that I had a much broader mind than she had when she was on this earth. And she was very much an evangelical Christian who believed that I was going to hell. And pretty much she told me, nah, I think you're right. I don't think you're going to hell, even though you don't, you didn't sign the paper that you believe in Jesus as your savior. So we'll be all right.
So yeah, and it's all confusing. Like, one's talking about reincarnation, and some other NDEers are telling us their hell experience, and then other people come and say, well, there is no hell. And I'm like, it's not simple like when we were kids to go to Sunday school. Here it is. I mean, you didn't do that though. You're like, oh, I'm going to think for myself.
Yeah, I didn't really buy into it. I heard it all, but I never really believed any of it. I held my judgment back. I thought, well, maybe that's true. Maybe it's not true. And then slowly I figured out, no, this eternal hell is not true. I think that's maybe when people say there's no hell, I think what they're saying is there's no eternal hell. Like this is where you're going for all of eternity, which is what the Christian religion teaches you. You don't get a second chance. That's it. You're done. You're going to hell forever and ever. And that's, I think, but there are uncomfortable places, of course, uncomfortable realms. And that's where people, I think, And the same, it's no exception on people's deathbed in the hospice study. Mostly people were having these beautiful, loving experiences, but others were not. And they were processing, it turns out, stuff from their past. One was a World War II guy who had never really let go of being involved at the invasion of Normandy. They didn't rescue as many soldiers as he had hoped, and witnessing all that death and carnage, he never spoke about it. But boy, did he start having dreams about it on his deathbed. It's like he had to process it and let it go in order to move forward. And that's what a lot of people do. And that can seem quite hellish. Another story in that book was a cop. He had been a cop for 40 years, this guy named Eddie, and he was a dirty cop. So he had planted evidence. He had beat people up. He had cheated on his wife. He was a drunk. At the same time, he had all of these other good, wonderful aspects to his personality. But boy, he started reliving all of that, feeling guilty. But the natural process of death seems to start that life review before you even die. And that can seem very hellish depending on your lifetime. So,
yeah. And it seems like we're all given.
People transform from those hellish experiences just as much as those who don't have the hellish experiences. So it all just depends on what is going to be the transformative material for us, what's going to work the best to get us through a particular issue.
Yeah, it just seems to me like no matter, what near-death experience you listen to, ultimately you can see where there is someone guiding it. Even like Eben's, he ended up finding later how he knew this was true was because of his sister. Right. There's some superior knowledge that is guiding. And, just like, me at 5 years old drowning, I'm hovering over the water and I hear a female voice say, "Don't go yet. If we find you soon, you might go back." What in the world? I don't have to listen to anybody anymore. I don't have to eat my vegetables. I don't have to go in at bedtime. Who is this person? I don't see her. But there's a voice guiding me. And then other things I heard during that, I was being guided either by vision, show up and teach me. I'm like, oh, okay. Or actually being shown something and be audibly told something. And then 20 years later, have another near-death experience that's completely different, because I go through the tunnel and then the white light in heaven, and there was God and Jesus and his panel of people. And I've heard, I think Dr. Jeffrey Long say, actually in the studies of NDEs, it's a small percent that's actually encountered God and Jesus. So I fit in that small percent. And it was just a white outline. It's like a knowing. And I heard the voice audibly talking to me. And so I forget where I was going with that. But or honestly, I'm just having I don't even know where I'm going. I had a point.
I know the feeling.
But so yeah, I mean, mine was God related in both of them, because I was told God sends children here to be loved. That's why he sends them here. And then not long after that, drowning at 5 years old, I had a NDE experience at Sunday school, and I was told then Jesus loves children of every color. Never forget that. And so there's this profound voice, and there's this guidance, and a lot of things happen in my 25-year-old NDE. I was taken in the future, and I was spilling out my life review. It was not shown to me. I was showing God all the abuse I went through. And there was always, and even throughout my life and my spiritual experiences in my prayer, there's always this other, not me, telling me things, helping me out that I couldn't possibly know. And then after my tubal pregnancy, I come back with this knowing. I would all of a sudden know somebody in the house needs my help, and I'm knocking on the door, or I just have a feeling I need to go up that road and there's an accident, and just these things that are outside of me. And I hear a lot of people, some even say that they are God, and you kind of you're a partner with God or something. And I'm like, I understand that's where you're coming from. Everybody's come from a different place, but for me, it is a trust in the other side, is trust in God, the trust in Jesus, trust in my angels that come in and tell me things that I couldn't know, that have helped other people, that have helped me. And just hearing my child that night, that certainly wasn't in my head. That's not what I
Right.
was thinking about, but
Right.
it's saved my life ultimately.
But you also
And
seem to have this openness to that oneness, right? So you know when someone needs help, you know you need to go somewhere. You don't know why, but you have this intuitive sense, and that's something we can all cultivate. You've had a lot of different experiences over time, and so it's opened you up. And if any of your listeners haven't had those experiences, you can certainly cultivate them in order to open up that intuitive sense. It really is all of our birthright to feel that connection, whether it's God, angels, guardian angel, lots and lots of different aspects to it. One thing I always learned was, like, in the dream space, when you're having a dream, is that everyone in the dream is an aspect of you, somehow a reflection of you. And so that greater force can be thought of in a similar way. Until we have that kind of more direct visceral experience that you're speaking of, that would bring more information to how that all works. So
I
yeah,
guess you
very
can't
good.
know someone until you've met them.
Yeah, and you don't know what you don't know, or you're just making up that you know. So I could say things that aren't true, or I could just speak my truth, and that's really all any of us
Yeah.
can do.
Yeah.
And all of our truth is going to be a little bit different because we're all such unique aspects of this whole. If we were all the same, this grand experiment, it wouldn't work the same. We need to be different. So
I had a girl, it was a guest the other day on the podcast, and she had a hell near-death experience. And, you know, people that come back from a near-death experience and they're still kind of in that drug and alcohol scene, well, who else is going to tell those people about that near-death experience? They're not going to hear it in church. They're not going to click on an NDE podcast. But, and like I was saying, I was working on the pipeline with my husband, which is completely a new career for me because I was investigations, counseling, and social work. And so I'm on the pipeline. And a couple of times I felt led and started talking about my near-death experience. And both times it led to someone saying, well, that happened to me too. And I didn't know what it was called. And, I feel like sometimes we're put places that we need to be because those people aren't going to go to church, or like your people you're working with, and they can tap into this realm. If they don't have to buy into God, they don't have to buy into Jesus or afterlife even, but they're tapping into something. When you're getting into nature and you're getting into your truth, you're tapping into, it's still God.
right, exactly.
I don't think he's too political. You have to go to this and you have to subscribe to that. I'm still God.
Yeah.
I'm
This
in the
whole
tree, I'm in the flower.
the politicization of him. My grandmother was politicized God way back when. It's nothing new. It's just become more prevalent. But yeah, it's how can that be? How could that be? It's just couldn't be.
Yeah. And I think the main thing is, is relationship. Everybody is so on different sides of everything, and you have to agree with me or you have to see it my way. And the main thing is relationship is so much important than being right. And my sister, my middle sister, and my brother, 2 years older than me, they were like this from birth, and they haven't spoke since Trump got elected. I mean,
wow.
like,
Because they're on opposite ends of the spectrum.
yeah, like over 50 years of being bosom buddies. I mean, they were like twins. They were so tight, and all through, having their kids and he was Santa Claus every year at her house, and over Trump.
Wow.
He didn't like Trump and he quit speaking to her, and that's just it.
Well, they're not alone. Lots has happened to lots of families. So we have some divides in our family, although no one has stopped talking. So
yeah. So anything we can do, I think, to try to, bring things together. And I know I have Christian friends that don't watch my podcast because they, some of them are more new age than what they can accept. But that doesn't mean we're totally not Christian either. We're just talking. We're just trying to understand. We're scratching the surface. So
yeah, well, certainly when you look at the original teachings of Jesus, love everyone, treat everyone the same, treat everyone as you would like to be treated. That's the message. That's the core. That's what NDEers tell us. That's what people who find out for themselves come back telling us, that it's about how we treat each other and treating each other with respect. And it's as simple as that.
And, you know, the
honestly.
story of, you know, the religious, self-righteous people throwing the rocks at the lady that they thought was unclean. And
Yeah,
Jesus, you know, stopped and say no, you know, and showing her love.
yeah,
I mean, what greater example of, you know, how you can be so religious in your convictions, you're actually hurting people
right.
because of those convictions, like of what is your view of right to a point to where you're actually now doing wrong. So,
Yeah, but you know, you're wise. You just want to meet people where they are. And if some can hear it this way and some can hear it that way, we all have a role to play to get to everyone. And I got, you know, I don't have any big axe to grind over anything. It's just presenting the truth. And if people, the truth that I feel, and if people show up and respond to it, then that's great. And we all can just move forward.
and you know, and you're putting alm even, you know, say you got your bilateral beads, you're putting alm in there. And, you know,
Yeah.
maybe, you know, people will connect with divine, with the universe, with whatever they can accept that they can allow in to open them up.
What's interesting about that is that when some people listen to it, they say things like, oh, I feel I'm at home. This is my spiritual, you know, destiny or whatever. And this is, oh, I just feel so wonderful. And then others will say that it feels spooky or scary. And others will have the sort of intellectual response that Om is Hindu, so that means it's bad and I can't do it. It's not allowed. So lots and lots of responses based on just people's beliefs. But they're just vibrations. They're just vibrations. And that Om sound can be very powerful outside of any kind of spiritual tradition, just from vocalizing it yourself. And the only way to find out is to do it yourself and see what you feel.
Yeah. I know going through the tunnel to my near-death experience, I realized later, I kept saying, I am. Like, I am so sorry, my children, you know, that I had died. I am so sorry. And I am going so far away. And I am. And I was like, wow, everything I was thinking, sort of, I am. And when I hear you talk about your own, you know, I would probably be the person being like, I am, you know, like just feeling I am. And to get in, because it seems like during a near-death experience, we are out of our brain, out of our body. So we are just soul. And when we come back, we remember that full soulness of ourselves.
Right.
And we're trying to express it with words, and we can't. And we're trying to put the pieces together, and we're trying to process it and trying to fit it into this world. And so as I get older, I get more back into who I am as me as a soul, and not who I was as back when I was 100 pounds and thought I had it going on, you know, thought I was cool.
Right. And more about your essence of your soul, as opposed to, oh, I'm a mom, I'm a teacher, I'm a nurse. It's just that essence of who you are. So that's very good.
Yeah.
Takes us all a long time to get there, doesn't it?
Yeah. Ugh. And I can see where your bilateral beats, that what you guys, I believe, are aiming for is to get into this centered space, and probably is in touching your soul and getting connect with that. And then, you know, like we were talking about with Eben, with your childhood and mine, is to find that self-love. And because out of self-love, I think we connect to our soul and connect better to the rest of the universe, and be able to go out in the world and be a more loving spirit, instead of, oh, you gotta be like this, you gotta be like that.
And that's spiritual health. So this mental health is so popular now, you know, and I even mentioned it: reduce anxiety, don't have as much stress, don't be depressed, and all of the different mental health things. But spiritual health is exactly what you just described: a sense of connection, a sense of feeling loved and expressing love and feeling connection and wanting to be with others and treating others well. That's our spiritual health. And I think if we focus first on our spiritual health, that the mental health will kind of take care of itself. And spirit over matter is a beautiful way of saying it, because ultimately the spiritual realm is what is really informing the physical realm and the mental realm. And so if we think of it in that way, then really spiritual health is primary. before mental health and physical health. If we can feel spiritual healthy, then the other things don't matter as much. So I love the way you described that.
Okay. Well, I don't want to take up all your day. I appreciate you so much talking to me and explaining this to me. And thank you for sharing your experience, how you met Eben, because I've been really curious.
Yeah, sure. It was fun. Thank you, Peggy, for having me on.
Bye-bye.
Bye.